We are on the section 4.4, linear regression concepts, page 39. So for your chapter 4, what we have been learning, think about it, right? We start to learn to draw a line. So given an equation, right, like y equals mx plus b, your slope-intercept form, right? So mainly you use this style. So if the equation is given, then you can graph the line. That's what we have been learning, right? Or if you are given a line, then you write the equation like that. So we have been doing this because for stats, you need to know how to do the line so you can do the prediction, right? That's the whole idea. Then on this section, we are going to interpret the slope of a line, right? Interpret what does that m means in stats, and also interpret the y-intercept, how we are using this concept in stats, what kind of meaning is given, okay? So we call it linear regression concepts. Look at your page 39 on the top. Okay, a regression line is a straight line that describes how a response variable y changes as an explanatory variable x changes. We often use a regression line to predict the value of y for a given value of x. So what are we talking about? Regression line, just a line, right? But in stats, we call it a regression line because for this line, it has a particular meaning. So that's your x, that's your y, okay? Then y is changed according to your x, okay? So you need to decide, okay, for a problem, what's your x? What does x mean, right? What's your y? What does y mean? So that's what we are going to talk about. At the same time, the slope has a certain meaning and the y-intercept has a certain meaning, okay? So let's take a look, some examples. Then first we interpret the slope. Then we interpret the y-intercept. Okay, so for us to interpret the slope of a line. Okay, for us to interpret the slope of a line, interpret the slope of a line as the change in y when x changes by 1. Okay, so we are talking about, so x is here. So when x increase 1, right, then y increase so much. Then what does that mean? Let's take a look at some examples. First one, a study was done to see the relationship between the time it takes, x, okay? So x is the time it takes to complete a college degree and the student loan debt incurred y, okay? The equation of the regression line was found to be this way. So you will be given the regression line like this. Then it has x and y's. So it means what? You have x here, you have y here. So what does x mean? According to this question, x is what? X is the time to complete a college degree, right? So X is time to complete a college degree means what? Your X can be 1 year or 2 years and so on. Okay? Then what is Y? It says Y is this equation formula and Y is what? Student loan debt incurred. So Y is what? The debt incurred. That means the more, right? More years you need to complete a college degree, the more debts you will incur, right? So according to this, if you graph the line, you will find out it's somewhere looks like that. So it's telling you what? It shows the more years a student completes a degree, the more debt he or she will incur, right? Okay, let's see what was the question. Interpret the slope of the regression line in the context of the study. So it wants you to interpret the slope. So first you write it in slope-intercept form, right? mx plus b. So it will be like this. Okay? And what is your m? M is here. M is 13298, right? So it's asking you to interpret what does M mean. So your M is 14329, right? Which is what? Over 1, which is rise over run. Then rise is your Y, changing in Y. Run is changing in X. So changing in X is what? 1, and changing in Y will be 14329. Okay, so this is a changing, okay? Changing in X, this is a changing in Y. So X is what? The time to complete. Y is what? The debt you will incur. So it's better, let's try to practice write the conclusion. How would you write the conclusion? Let's try to write the conclusion in a full sentence, right? So this is the formula is given, not exact. It's talking about on average. Okay, that's stats. To study, it's just talk about average. So we are talking about each interpret the slope of a line as the change in Y when X changes in 1 year, right? So each time you increase X by 1, how much you increase by Y? That's what we are talking about. So on average, this problem is talking about the student loan, right? Debt. We are talking about debt. Will what? Increases by how much? Changing in Y, right? 14,329 for each additional year. It takes to complete a college degree. So somebody did a study, they did a survey, later on you will learn that in stats. Then to generate this equation, linear regression line, then you can do the prediction. 1 year, it will cost you $14,329 in debt, right? The more years it goes, the more debt you will incur. 2 years, it will be double. 3 years will be 3 times, right? So that's what we are talking about, how to interpret the regression line, okay, with the slopes, okay? So let's look at the second example. Second example, it says, suppose that a research group tested the cholesterol level of a sample of 40-year-old woman, okay, and then wait many years to see the relation between a woman's HDL, high cholesterol level, right, in mgdl, milligram per deciliter, okay, and her age of death. The equation of a regression line was found to be this way, 103 minus 0.3x. Okay? Interpret the slope of the regression line in the context of the study. So let's do the picture first, right? See how it looks like. So that's your x, that's your y. So what's your x? What's your y? We are studying for 40-year-old woman, right? Then wait for a couple years. Then you show the high cholesterol level the woman has, the last year. Okay, so X is what? Did they say anything about X? Okay, the study is finding what? The relationship between the woman's cholesterol level and her age of death. So according to HDL, high cholesterol level, and the age of the death. So death is depending on the age of death is depending on the cholesterol level. So X we are talking about is what? HDL, right? In mgdl, right? Then Y is what? The age of death. Okay, so if you graph this one, all right, you use your t-table. X is 0, Y is what? 103, right? Then X is 1, then it drop, and 2, it drop. Things, something like that. Okay, so what does this picture tells you? What does this picture tell you, right? It means what? The more cholesterol level the woman has after year 40, right? The more it has the age of the death. If you have very high, then the death will be what? The age will be what? Smaller and smaller, right? So it showed the high of the HDL level the woman has, the last year she will live, right? How old she will be. That's what it is. So by this formula, we write it y equals mx plus b, right? Negative 0.3x. See, the slope is what? Negative, so it goes from left to right, going down, right? So your m is what? This guy, right? Negative 0.3 and over 1, right? It's what? Rise over run. Rise is what? Rise is changing in y, right? Then run is what? Changing in x. That means the x, cholesterol level is 1 mg over dl, 1 milligrams per deciliter. Then the more it has, the y will be drop. We drop what? 0.3. 0.3 is what? Y. It's by years. right? So how we are going to interpret this result of the slope? So let's write it out, your conclusion. What we are talking about, right? So we are talking about on average, always. Okay, on average, what kind of things we are talking about? For X, right? What is X? It's for those 40 years old women, right? They are predicted to die, right? 0.3 year younger. So the more higher you die younger, right? Die younger. Okay. For every additional 1 milligram per deciliter, whatever that is, medical term, right? Of high cholesterol level. Practice to write a conclusion this way, so you know exactly what you are talking about. You refer to what's your X, what's your Y. Okay? Got idea? Look at the next example on your page 40, number 3. It says, a researcher asked several employees who worked overtime, how many hours of overtime did you work last week? And on the scale from 1 to 10, show satisfied. How satisfied are you with your job? The scatter plot and the regression line from this study are shown below. Okay, so it shows this one. So first you have to decide what's your X, what's your Y you are referring, and that's regarding to your study, right? So X is 5, 10, 15, 20. It says how many hours overtime did you work the last week? Then how satisfied you are, right? So X is what? The hours overtime worked, right? That means 5 hours, then satisfaction through 1 to 10, right? So if it's 5, it looks like what? Satisfaction is somewhere 8, 9. Then if you work 10 hours overtime, your satisfaction is 6. Then if you work 15 hours overtime, your satisfaction become 2 or 20 hours. So it starts to drop. The more overtime you work, the Y is what? Y is your scale of the satisfaction, 1 to 10, right? So if we do that, then that's actual data. Then what is a linear regression line is, in stats class, you will find out if you are given this scatter plot, then what's your line? The line will roughly look like this way. That's what they have. Okay, you use a calculator to fit it, right? To find the line. Somewhere kind of in between, cover all those points inside, right? So it shows what? That the more hours over time the person worked, the less satisfied he or she was, right? So this is what it's telling you. So you can see what's your slope. So we are interpreting the slope of a line. What does that mean, right? So first, you take a look. What's your slope? Slope is a positive or negative? Slope is a negative, right? Then how do we find the slope? Slope is what? Changing in y over what? Changing in x. Rise over run, right? So you need to find a few points you can pinpoint exactly where they are. Then you can just do rise over run. So like these 2 points is right on the line, so it's easy. We are talking about the line, right? The slope of line, the regression line. So this one is what? This position look like 10, 6. This position look like what? 20 and 2, right? Then we can use x1, y1, x2, y2. So that's just x1, y1. Identify them first. x2, y2, right? So how do we calculate that? Changing in y, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? So y2 minus y1, 2 minus 6. x2 minus x1, 20 minus 10. So it's negative 4 over 10. Is that right? Or we can simplify, divided by 2. That would be negative 2 over 5. So that's the slope we need to interpret. Okay? So what does that mean? Over time you worked, over the satisfaction, how satisfied you are. Okay? So let's draw the conclusion. How we will say it, right? On average. Okay? We are talking about is the job satisfaction. The job satisfaction what? Goes down, right? Goes down. This is the changing in y. Goes down, negative 2. Goes down 2 points for what? Every 5 hours per 5, right? Drop the y per hours overtime worked. So for every 5 hours overtime employee worked, asked to do. Is that right? So if you do the survey, then you got those scatter plot. Then you will use the calculator that will find the line to fit all those points. Then you will find out, you will learn how to do that in your stats class. Then here we just get you ready to understand the meaning with what do we try to figure out, right? So you need to identify your x, identify your y. Then regressional line is what on your page, previous page 39, it says it's a straight line. Regression line is a straight line that describes how a response variable y is a response to the x changes. That's what it is. Right? Got an idea? That's how we will look at the y equals what? mx plus b, slope intercept form. You have slope, then that's how we see what the slope really mean in the situation for your study, right? Then y-intercept has a special meaning as well. Then we will learn how to interpret the y-intercept of a line. Okay, so let's see some example to interpret the y-intercept on your page 40. Second part. Interpret the y-intercept of a line as the value of y when x is 0. Right? So what is b? Slope-intercept form means what? B is here, right? B is here, y-intercepted by y, intercepted by y-axis. So that's 0b. That means what? Your x is 0. So when we do the t-table, x is 0. What's your y? That's your b. Okay, x 0, you plug in the 0, y becomes b, right? So interpret the y-intercept of a line as the value of y when x is 0. So when we want to interpret y-intercept, that means when x is 0, what's your y value and what does it mean? Okay, then determine whether the y-intercept is useful for interpreting the relationship between x and y. Sometimes the y-intercept doesn't mean much. You will see some example, okay? Doesn't mean anything, but sometimes it does. So we need to identify, does it have meaning or not for y-intercept? Okay, so let's look some example. A study was done to see the relationship between the ounces of meat, X. Okay, so your graph is what? X. X is ounces of meat that people eat each day on average, and the hours per week for the Y they watch sports. The equation of the regression line was found to be Y equals 1.3 plus 0.4 X. Interpret the y-intercept of the regression line in the context of the study and explain why it has no practical meaning. Okay, let's figure out why. So first you have to write in what? Slope-intercept form, y equals 0.4x plus 1.3. So that's your M, that's your B, right? We want to interpret the B. So the slope is positive, so it goes up. So it goes up like this. This is your 1.3. Then what's our x? What's the y? Okay, so it's saying x is how much it weighs for the ounces of the meat, right? Then what's your y? It says y is hours watching sports. Watching sports. So it's talking about the more the person eat more meat, and they will watch the sports more. The more sports they watch, it means they like more meat. Okay? Then what happened to those vegan, those people? Do they watch sport? Yes. But we don't talk about that. We only talk about who eats meat, right? Then who eats meat, then the more they like the meat, the more they like to watch sport. That's it sounds like it. Right? So it wants you to interpret the y-intercept. Interpret this guy. Okay? So interpret this guy means what? X is 0. If x is 0, means what? How many ounces of meat the person eats? It means what? It means the person doesn't consume any meat. So what are we talking about? So we are talking about this person is what? It means the person is vegetarian, right? So, but we are talking about the person consume how many ounces of meat per per week between ounce of meat eat on average per week, right? Then we're talking about the person is a meat eater, not a vegan, right? Not a vegetarian. So if we talk about vegetarian for the relation between the meat and watching sport, does that make sense? Not really, right? So for this particular case, x equals 0 doesn't have any meaning, right? So conclusion is this. On average, we're still talking about average, okay? The vegetarian is expected to, because x is 0, then y is 3. Then a vegetarian is expected to watch how many hours? 1.3 hours, right? Watching sport each week. So according to this graph, the y-intercept means what? Y-intercept means on average vegetarian x equals 0, right? X equals 0, then it's expect to watch 1.3 hours for each week. So it doesn't make much sense. No practical, it doesn't make sense. Because it doesn't make sense. To talk about what? Vegetarian, right? Because that's not our study. Our study is talking about the relationship the person eat the meat, then how many hours they watch sport each week. We are not talking about vegetarian. But the x equals 0, the person become vegetarian, then we are not talking about how many hours they watch the TV for sport, right? So for this case, x equals 0 doesn't mean anything, okay? So it's saying the y-intercept doesn't have a practical meaning. That's what it's talking about. So we are interpreting the slope and y-intercept right now, right? So let's look at some more example on your page 41 for more interpretation for the y-intercept. Okay, example 2. Okay, a neonatal nurse at the Children's Hospital has collected data on the birth weight X in pounds, the number of days Y that the newborn stay in the hospital. The equation of the regression line was found to be y equals 45 minus 3.9x. Interpret the y-intercept of the regression line in the context of the study, or explain why it has no practical meaning. Let's see. What are we talking about? X is your birth weight in pounds. And the number of days Y the newborn stays in the hospital. So we have the situation like this. Okay, if you write it y equals mx plus b, it should be look like this. Okay, so it's a negative slope, it goes down. So it should be goes down. So what is x, what is y? It says x is what? The birth weight for the newborn. Right? The y is what? It will tell you on the question. Is the that newborn stay in the hospital. So it's days. The newborn in the hospital. Okay, so let's see what kind of meaning it tells. Okay, so this is your slope. Slope is negative. This is your y-intercept. Y-intercept, which is 0.45. So let's see, what does that mean? So it means what? At x is 0, then it means what? X is 0, it means that a newborn is how much it weighs. Birth weight is 0 pounds. Is that possible? Which make no sense. Just like we talk about the meat eater, then x is 0, it doesn't eat any meat, then that's not the relationship we're talking about. Then we talk, right, on the previous example. Then on this one, we talk about newborn's birth weight. Then birth weight is 0, that means do we have a newborn? No, so it doesn't make sense, right? So the conclusion we might have is the y-intercept doesn't have any meaning. Okay, the y-intercept of this regression line has what? No practical meaning. That's what it is, right? Talk about birth weight. Birth weight cannot be 0, otherwise you don't have a newborn. Is that right? Then talk about meat eater. If you eat meat 0, then you are not a meat eater. So that's not a relationship we were looking for, right? So it means the what? The x is 0 doesn't mean, has no meaning. Then the y-intercept has no meaning, because y-intercept is talking about x is at 0 place. Is that right? So far we are talking about what? Interpret the linear regression lines, and the slope always has a meaning. But the y-intercept, it has a meaning or it may not. Okay, so let's look at the number 3. Let's see y-intercept has a meaning or not. Okay, it says a researcher asked several people, how many cups of coffee did you drink last week? And how many times did you go to a shop or restaurant for a meal or a drink last week? The scatter plot and the regression line from the study are shown below. It shows you, okay, some line, regression line here, then they check with people, say how many coffee do they drink each day or last week. How many coffee do they drink? Then for the people who drinks coffee, they might like to go to the shops or go to the restaurant, right? So the more coffee they drink, the more likely they go to the shop and go to the restaurant, okay, for a meal or drink. So the plot looks like this. So this plot shows what? The more coffee a person drinks, the more likely the person would go for a meal or drink at the shop or at the restaurant. So it's showing that. Then if x is 0, does this person drink any coffee? At x 0, y is what? -1 right here. Does it make sense? You don't go to shop or restaurant 1 time, twice, 3 times, or -1 time. It's no such thing, right? So at x is 0, y is -1. What does that mean? We are talking about y-intercept position, right? It means if according to the graph, it means what? It means that, let's just write it out so you can see. The person who does not drink, right? X is how many drinks of coffee you have. So the person who doesn't drink coffee, right, will go -1 time to a shop or restaurant, right? That's what this graph is telling us, okay? To purchase a meal or drink. Does that make sense? No, it makes no sense. Right? So that's what it's telling us. So what kind of conclusion we can make, interpret the y-intercept of a line for this case? So the conclusion we will make will be what? The y-intercept is not making the sense, okay? The y-intercept of this regression line has what? Has no practical meaning. So that's it. It is telling us. But sometimes it has meaning. I didn't write any example with meaning. All right, I just show you all 3 examples have no meaning. But if it's meaningful, you should be able to tell, right? That's why I didn't include it here. I thought it's very straightforward. So when you do the homework, you will see some examples to interpret the slope and the y-intercept of the regression line. It should be obvious, hopefully, right? You need to practice and look more examples, then you should be able to tell. Are we okay? So this will cover your section 4.4.